All right, good evening, everyone. I am reliably informed that the world is full of sunshines and rainbows. Unfortunately, none of them are showing up for tonight's stream. How is everybody tonight?
Doing fine.
So this kicked off about 2 days ago. Israel entered Rafah and took the crossing into Egypt. And I didn't start streaming because I wasn't prepared. And I thought, well, if I sit on this, maybe some more news will come out. That didn't really happen either. It's kind of been sparse news on the ground.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. I think some news did come out, not just necessarily about the event, but about behind-the-scenes stuff that preceded it.
Yes, there's a lot to talk about with regards to the ceasefire and negotiations in Egypt. There isn't so much to talk about the actual fighting.
No.
In fact, I can sum that up quickly. It looks like Israel is shooting things. There might be people shooting back. We don't know.
Still surprised.
I got a lot of conflicting reports. Apparently, Hamas's naval commander was killed today, which is...
They have a naval commander?
That was my reaction, actually. They have a naval commander? Does he have a boat? Like, we have a naval commander. Let's get a boat next.
The leaky canoe.
Yes. There's a couple items on the conflict map, but nothing really to speak of. Israel has seized the crossing at Rafah that runs into Egypt. I don't know what they're doing there because Hamas runs all their supplies underground. But here we are. It's almost comical if people weren't getting killed. 55 in the last day is what the report is from the Gaza Ministry of Health.
Are the last holdouts of Hamas's armed wing in Rafah?
No, the last holdouts of Hamas's armed wing are not the last holdouts of Hamas's armed wing. They're also all over Gaza again because tunnels are a thing.
No.
Like this entire discussion that has developed around this attack on Rafah is delusional. You have Netanyahu saying we're going to destroy Hamas, and Hamas is like, well, we're not here anymore. We're over there, and it's an incredibly frustrating situation because there are multiple conversations going on, and there's only one that's really like the only one that I feel is really valid is the one going, what the fuck are they doing? Because they're not actually accomplishing anything. The IDF pulled out of Gaza City and Hamas now reoccupied it.
Where is the data to suggest that? I haven't I haven't found, honestly, all that much about the military operation. I found, like, I've seen a lot more data on, the civilian death and, destruction of infrastructure, things like that, but I haven't really...
It's become an inferred thing because Hamas has fired rockets from previously cleared quote-unquote positions.
Okay.
So it stands to reason that they have gone back to those places that the IDF has withdrawn from.
I mean, they could be doing that, but that doesn't mean that they're fully occupying an area.
Except there's no IDF presence in those places anymore. They've pulled out to a very contained area.
Interesting.
The question I would ask is whether that was intentional or, how to put this, intentionally withdrawing from those areas that they had secured in order to lure Hamas to move back into them, exposing their forces to another attack.
It's a large area to abandon, I guess, is the way to put it.
Yeah, I'll put it this way. The entire Israeli strategy in this is very opaque.
And, like, obviously they did that in the case of Al Shifa Hospital and whatever the hell happened there that we don't know. the details of, and sounds incredibly bad. Somebody killed somebody. A lot of somebody's killed a lot of somebody's. Who did what is hard to tell. But
Was
like,
there a mass shooting
they have found a
against
grave.
civilians there?
They found graves, but that doesn't necessarily speak to the age of the graves, nor does it speak to who filled them. Right? There is ample evidence to wonder if it went either way. Like Hamas came in and started killing certain people, or Israel did. We don't know, and I don't think we're ever going to find out, to be perfectly honest. They found graves with upwards of 200 bodies in the general vicinity of the hospital during the second major raid there. So I don't like. There's no real like. The information blackout that has come from Gaza is remarkable in this day and age, particularly when you contrast it with, for example, how much information we can get out of Ukraine.
That's what I was just going to say. Yeah, there's a lot more information there.
It's very effectively controlled, and that makes it very difficult to say with certainty. What we do know is that a large Israeli force moved in on the hospital, and after they left, these graves were uncovered, which doesn't look good.
Yeah, I think the lack of information is by design on both sides' part, because they both benefit from the confusion and obscurity of what's actually going on, because it allows them to pursue their own agendas without having to really worry about what other people might perceive, because they can always just claim, oh, no, that's not true information, and nobody's going to really be able to dispute it.
And no one's going to be able to investigate it after the fact.
Exactly.
So it makes a lot of things speculative at the end of the day. We have a good idea of what the Israeli movements are within Gaza. So we know that they've pulled forces out of the area, and that Hamas has been able to shoot rockets from areas that were previously quote-unquote controlled. We don't have a good understanding of how many Hamas fighters have been killed. Hamas has reported somewhere around 20% of all standing forces inside Gaza, that includes them, their allies, etc., have been killed. Israeli spokesperson got on Piers Morgan the other day and said, well, we've killed 14,000 Hamas fighters. Well, Piers Morgan, in a rare flash of journalistic integrity, then turns around and asks, well, how many civilians have you killed? We don't know. Well, how do you know how many fighters you've killed if you don't know how many civilians you've killed? The numbers are very opaque in a really frustrating way for a modern conflict. And that's, I think, what highlighted the frustrations people have had around Rafah and this attack is it's not clear what this is going to accomplish. And this goes into a very larger, I think, narrative that we have been dealing with for the last 20 or so years, since 2001, about how do you win a war on terror, quote unquote. It's not like ISIS is gone, or Al Qaeda is gone, or the Taliban is gone, or Boko Haram is gone, or all these groups are still very much alive and kicking in other places, and sometimes back where they were before. So like, the whole point, I think, to talk about like, oh, they're going into Rafah to finish off Hamas, is just insane. It's not going to happen.
I think it's
step back and go away.
They can, but there's also, a limited. They're stuck in one area. It's not like Boko Haram, which is controlling swaths of the countryside in Nigeria, and they're also with like Boko Haram. I think it's a bad comparison because, you're dealing with a state, like the Nigerian military, which isn't, nowhere near. Doesn't have anywhere near the capability or the reach that the Israeli military has. So no, I think that they can destroy them militarily, but the ideology will keep them popping back. They'd have to run a full-scale blockade and a long-term occupation in that region. They definitely can destroy them.
I don't even think that works.
No, that's not going to work either. You can't destroy them militarily. They're just going to go into tunnels.
Yeah, insurgencies and guerrilla movements are notoriously squishy. You know, you poke your finger here, and yeah, you can secure that area to the table, but it just squishes up somewhere else. Um,
With a
the,
heavy
only,
okay.
the only time that I can think of that a counterinsurgency has been successful is in Malaysia by the British. And that was because it was both a minority population that was staging the insurgency, and the British concentrated very heavily on removing public support from the insurgents. The Israelis are doing, if anything, just the opposite. They're generating massive support for the insurgents here.
Yeah,
So
if I was Israel, I'd be blanketing Gaza in food and blankets and crap.
Oh, no shit. Yeah.
so yeah, I think like the Malaysia example is a really successful counterinsurgency operation. The Soviets were also extremely successful in their operations in post-World War II in the Baltic and in Western Ukraine. And their policy was essentially the opposite of what the British did. It's essentially, you know, guerrillas operate within the sea of the people. So what you do is you drain that sea. You make it very, very tough for them to operate by inflicting, you know, terror on the civilian population. And the Soviets were very successful
But Israel has
in
been
those
pursuing this kind of
counterinsurgencies.
strategy, and they've also been pursuing the strategy of playing the PLO, now the Palestinian Authority, off of Hamas for decades now, or outright assassinating people who are moderates in both Israel and Palestine.
Yeah.
The thing I think to realize about Hamas is that Hamas is very much a chimera of Israel's creation. They have made Hamas possible, and their actions here are continuing to make Hamas possible. You have a population that 1 million people crowded into Rafah specifically because Israel told them to be safe. And now they're getting conflicting directions on where to go and where to run for safety now that Rafah is no longer safe.
Yeah.
And which means that you have a civilian population. Like there's reports that an Israeli Navy got in on the fun and was shelling a refugee camp today. It's not, they don't have big ships in the Israeli Navy. I think they don't even technically have ships, they're just boats. But like you have these reports coming in all the time of civilian populations getting hit, and Israel just doesn't seem to care.
I think that's, and I honestly think that's Bibi's plan here.
And yeah, I think the operation in
Rafah is
Rafah
to make it. Yeah, I think it's all to make the Israeli population, I don't know, inured to the horror that they're committing by just continuing to do it, so he can basically prosecute a genocide and have no real internal objection to having done so.
Yeah, I've come around. I've come around after this to the genocide argument, to be honest. After the ceasefire talks went the way they did.
Yeah, exactly.
I came
And
around.
I think I think this is a good point to segue into that issue, because I think that, if anything, is more interesting than the whole Rafah invasion.
Basically, we have video of Israel destroying artwork, dangerous artwork that said Gaza. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all I know. Even Ryan Macbeth, who is horrible on the Israel issue, was upset about that. So, you know it's bad.
Yeah.
So the ceasefire negotiations have been happening in Egypt, back and forth between Hamas and Israel, sort of, kind of, mediated by Egypt and the United States. And Egypt is, much like Iran, one of Hamas's biggest backers and probably surest allies. And they have worked very hard. They're being very cool about this whole thing, by the way, because technically occupying that crossing is a violation of the treaty between Israel and Egypt. They're being very chill about all of this. Egypt is... They had a negotiation. Israel boycotted the negotiation. then turned around and said they weren't included in the negotiation after they boycotted it. Therefore, they're not going to accept it. Uh, they reached a tentative agreement that everyone who attended the meeting could live with, and Israel said, "No, we aren't going to stop the war," which is kind of the point of a ceasefire.
You understand what the genesis of why they refused it is. It's because two of the minority parties in the Likud coalition basically issued an ultimatum to Bibi and said, if you agree to this, we're leaving the coalition government, and it will collapse, and that means you're no longer prime minister. It means all the charges that are currently pending against you become active again, and you go to prison for the rest of your life. So this is like Putin with, negotiations in Ukraine. He can't do it because the moment he does, it's signing his own death warrant. The same thing goes with Bibi.
He's politically dead in the water at that
point.
Oh, yeah. And that's largely what this operation is about, I think, when you get down to it.
Yeah.
Is keeping the war going so Netanyahu can stay in power. And if they manage to kill a bunch of people in the process, more power to them, I guess.
Yes, from his coalition's perspective, yeah.
Well, I don't think it's a question of making the Sinai and filling it with Palestinians and making it Egypt's problem. You look at Likud's ambitions in this regard, and they want to take the Sinai Peninsula back too. There is a lot of very nervous people sitting on the Egyptian side of the border right now, because they don't quite know how to deal with Israel without fighting. And they don't want to do that, I don't think. I know some commenters I associate with think that Egypt's going to get involved. I don't think they want to.
Well, I think they're fairly smart, the Egyptians, that is, in terms of they realize that if Israel keeps shooting itself in the foot and U.S. aid gets withdrawn, to some extent, that's a carte blanche for them to say, okay, we can start working to form an alliance among various Arab League or former Arab League nations to maybe deal with the Israeli problem once and for all.
Oh, look, someone I have to ban from chat as soon as I can because that stupid button's in the way. Someone say something quick in chat. Anyway, yeah, no, that is part of it, to be sure. Thank you, Titan. Hi. You're in timeout. Anyway. Yeah, that's definitely part of it. If Egypt figures if they wait, they can get taken advantage. Because as far as they're concerned, the last time this kicked off was 1973. And they were winning for a time there.
I mean, with the treaty that they have, do you think it's likely to be dissolved?
If Israel continues to provoke Egypt, then yes. Egypt, it's the same thing that led Iran to launch the drone attack. They cannot not answer strikes to their sovereignty.
What has Israel done to Egypt lately?
Well, they have completely cut out of the ceasefire negotiations. They've occupied the Rafah crossing, and those are two pretty big ones. Fairly substantial provocations, really.
Yeah.
Like the treaty provocation is actually pretty serious. I'm surprised more hasn't been said on that.
And I think there's also some shenanigans going on at the Aqaba border crossing.
I think there's some shenanigans with aid going on too that they're not happy about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like restrictions that are being done arbitrarily and weirdly on things, which gets into the whole sugar rocket fiasco from last week. I don't want to get into that again. Christ Almighty. However, the other part of that particular equation, I think, is Egypt is not 1973 Egypt anymore, and they're much
No.
better. They're much better about playing both sides down the middle. They're not really in the Soviet camp the way they used to be in the Cold War. Uh, and as long as they think that America is going to support Israel, they're not willing to risk the wrath of America and American money not coming into Egypt, particularly when it's American warships that are working so hard to keep the Suez Canal open.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think any sort of armed conflict between Egypt and Israel is likely.
It's certainly not anytime soon.
Yeah. Probably, long term, as in 2 or 3 decades. Yeah, possibly. I don't even think the conditions are right for that.
Yeah, I don't think anytime soon. But it gets into what they can do in other ways, like how they can influence other countries that Israel wants to do business with, like Saudi Arabia. Is really their most immediate concern. And like, does Egypt put pressure on Saudi Arabia to put pressure on Israel to normalize in the normalization negotiations to recognize a Palestinian state? Like, if the Arab countries sit tight right now, they can probably get that. Like, they can probably put a major push towards that, and to really get a real talk about that for the first time since 2001. How many hostages are still captive? There's no way to tell.
Yeah, the ceasefire negotiations, one of the things is they were going to release as a token 33 hostages with the statement that additional ones would follow as long as Israel kept its part of the bargain.
Yes. Hamas is very wary, I think, of getting screwed here. Which is a fair assessment when you consider how these things have gone in the past.
Very much so.
Particularly like the massacre in 1982 in Lebanon, the Shatil and Saba camps and neighborhood was a direct result. It was a direct result of the PLO getting screwed on a ceasefire negotiation. The hostage count hasn't been verified. There are 2 principal problems. The first is we know for a fact that some of them are dead because Israel killed them. And it's possible Hamas killed some other ones. So like, the exact hostage count is probably really tricky. The other thing is Israel seems thoroughly uninterested in getting the hostages back. They're doing everything in their power to disincentivize that.
Yeah, which is kind of surprising given how in the past that was always one of their primary foci. They would in fact negotiate with terrorists if it was able to get captives returned.
Well, that's one of the dirty little secrets, right? Everyone says, oh, we don't negotiate with terrorists because that will encourage more terrorism. Well, very secretly and quietly negotiating with terrorists who usually third parties.
I mean, what other choice do you have?
You don't, and that's kind
you really don't.
That's kind of the dirty little secret of hostage taking. Is hostage taking can be incredibly effective in the event of, particularly in these events where you can move them around relatively easily, like you have a tunnel system in Gaza. At the beginning of the war, Shin Bet and the Delta Force, American special operators, were deployed out to try to rescue some hostages, and they're like, fuck, this is a bad job. We can't do it.
Yep.
It went horribly. It was like, it's a really tricky situation, I think, talking about tunnels, because like, on the one hand, you're like, well, why can't we just go in the tunnels? I'm like, I don't think you understand how dangerous that gets. Just find a particularly gray-haired individual with Vietnam vet on his hat who's about 5'4", and they'll probably be able to tell you what the problem is.
Yeah. A distinct and unimpeachable word.
Yes. It'll be very colorful, and a lot of Asian racism will be included in it, but you'll figure out what the problem is real quick.
Yeah.
And like having that particular conversation, like
That's one war memoir I'd love to read. Is that of a tunnel rat? I haven't.
There's a really good paranormal channel that does military stories that occasionally ventures into doing other things called Wartime Stories. They have a video on tunnel rats that I recommend.
Send it to me.
I will. Between Hamas and the Mexican drug cartels, the whole planet will be honeycombed in 100 years. Well, funny story, Titan. Did you know that I recently discovered that Hezbollah has a drug operation in Mexico? True story. They are helping cartels move drugs because they have an expertise in smuggling. They're not very interested in smuggling themselves into the United States. They just want to make a lot of money smuggling drugs in. So, you know, it's gonna be that.
Speak no ill will of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard in that regard, please.
Yeah, good practice. The cartels dabbing on the Border Patrol will never be not all. No, it's not even dabbing on the Border Patrol. They just bought half the Border Patrolmen. What are you talking about? Like, how do you think they get across? Here's $2,000. It's insanely cheap for the price too. Jesus. Like, the Border Patrol Union is incredibly like viciously political for an organization that's so thoroughly corrupt. Yeah. Lest we get off topic. Yeah, the ceasefire negotiations, I think, was a huge problem for Israel optically. Like, that went poorly for them. Because there were other options they had. They could have rejected the ceasefire negotiations and not gone into Rafah, but they did the two things. And that I think is really problematic for the we're not committing a genocide argument, because
what it's doing is telegraphing the real reason of why they're doing it when you add up all the other stuff that's going on. The continuation of the war has virtually nothing to do with getting hostages back or eliminating Hamas at this point. It's all about ensuring that Bibi stays in power.
Yes, and while and it's pushing Likud's goals further too.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's important to remember that Likud is just as guilty of using the phrase "from the river to the sea" as Palestinian supporters. Like, it goes the other way, and that is something I feel that has been lost, because I know Hetman wants to talk about this too, in the protesting that occurred over the past week and the encampments that are still kind of ongoing, I guess, in some places, where the police haven't cracked heads. Yes, it is in their charter, Cal. Go ahead. Sorry, Het. Go ahead.
Well, no, that is something that, of course, is, the Likud party has that sort of, rhetoric, and even worse, honestly. But I don't think people who shout that, really have any idea what it means, what it signifies.
I think when it comes to the protest, as best as I can tell,
the protesters really don't know shit about the issue. A lot of them don't.
The best as I can tell is that the negative anti-Semitism was present but overplayed and oversaturated.
Oh, I would say overplayed too, because you have among probably every protest camp a lot of liberal Jews that are students that are a part of it. So it's not I would say the anti-Semitism is there, but it is overplayed, like you said.
Yeah.
One thing that bothered me a bit, although actually the real term, as I know in Arabic, means like to throw something off, to shake off. So when me and my girlfriend were driving by Northwestern's pro-Gaza protest, we heard revolution, revolution, intifada, intifada. And, I didn't hear anything like globalize the Intifada or anything like that, but it made me feel a little bit uncomfortable knowing, the details about the first or second Intifada, actually, the bombings of, civilian
And the shooting of civilians by
areas.
Israelis.
Yeah, no, I mean,
It took
it's
two to
both
tango in
sides.
both intifadas.
I feel like the people, and even myself included, like, there really should be more accessible courses, like maybe even like a free course for everybody online, on the Israel-Palestine or Israeli-Arab conflict, because it's such a complex mess, honestly.
The problem
That
is that it's very difficult for anyone to speak honestly about this topic. It becomes increasingly difficult. I know some people saw the House passed the anti-Semitism bill. Speaking of which, I'm going to continue to speak about this issue in just the same terms as I have. If I get arrested, I need you guys to get me a lawyer. Just a thought. Collectively, everybody can pitch in. But the problem is that we have whitewashed Israel and overplayed how dangerous Palestine is. And you see Elon Levi, the former spokesperson of Israel, fired for being too extreme, even for Likud, to turn around and try to repaint everyone as Hamas supporters who has spoken out against Israel. You see this very dishonest effort by what I'm calling the pro-IDF crowd, to try and make this about we're poor, innocent people being hurt by terrorists, instead of a complex conflict in which two sides are fighting and both sides have done enormous wrongs in some cases. And this belies, I think, a problem that has come about is a lot of people have spent a considerable amount of time talking about rise in anti-Semitism. And okay, fair, but that has coincided with a rise in Islamophobia and a rise in anti-Palestinianism. And to focus on one of these things and to not talk about the other ones in the context of this full crisis, because it is a crisis, we are facing a very serious problem, to not talk about the full range of the problem and how people are denying Palestinian agency along with denying Israeli agency, and to focus on only one part of anti-Semitism, is to take that struggle and that problem that those people face and to use it for your own personal gain. And it makes you just as bad as Hamas or the IDF. And a lot of people in this space have done that. Brianna Wu and Wick are particularly guilty of it, and it's particularly disgusting. A lot of people in this Destiny has been turning around and arguing horrific things about Palestinians, and trying to pass off anti-Semitism as a virtuous thing for that. A Loner Box Sunday just covered a stream in which Loner Box decided to defend the massacre of civilians because they happened to be standing in the wrong space on an invisible line as correct and right. These things in this discussion has become insanely racist in a lot of very strong ways. And it's becoming lost in the entire thing, that there are a lot of Israelis and a lot of Palestinians who have never picked up or done violence, who have done their best to try to live in peace, and who aren't being given that opportunity. And the way that certain parties try to spread this amongst everyone, like how you have Zionists trying to make Zionism an imperative belief for all Jews, is harming the Jewish communities around the world who are just trying to live their lives. It's they are trying to take their conflict, they're trying to take their conflict and globalize it. It's very wrong.
Yeah, I agree.
I
don't disagree at all.
I've been having such a hard time looking at other discussions on this issue, like finding things to react to, because I'm just so disgusted by the behavior.
It's one of those issues that receives I don't know. It receives a lot more attention than, I don't want to say more attention than it deserves, because it's a very, I mean, what's going on currently
It receives the wrong kind of attention.
deserves, yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, it's not the only bloody conflict and human rights disaster that is, happening currently in the world. And I mean, even Ukraine's not, obviously, but the Israel-Palestine issue receives an enormous amount of attention.
Well, the other half of it is like we're intensely critical of Russia, and it would be wrong not to be intensely critical of Israel, who's acting in a similar fashion.
If not in some ways worse.
Well, it's worse in a particularly moral sense, I think. Russia is strictly speaking not an ally to the United States. We do not endorse the actions of Russia. But the United States provides arms and equipment to Israel. Our leaders, congressional and executive, are supportive of Israel. There's a very severe feeling that is sitting on injustice is what we're doing, and we're allowing injustice to occur, not even for a valid reason anymore. Like, the strategic importance of Israel has long since been dramatically reduced, particularly now that we have more assets and relationships in the region that are positive, even if they are tenuously positive. It's impossible to justify from a military standpoint. Like, it's not like Israel provides us bases or equipment, particularly in the light of the fact that other Arab countries do provide us bases and resources. And we're just doing this thing like reflexively, even though it's wrong, and that bothers people. I don't think it'll be as impactful in the election as certain people in the online spaces want to say.
Yeah.
But
I think it shows a lot of hypocrisy, though.
it does.
Yeah, it does. And one of your people in the chat stream is saying, yeah, and how often do we talk about Sudan or Myanmar or whatever? And I think that's part of it, is that the people who own all of these major media outlets are the ones who basically get to dictate what is considered important and what isn't, and they shape that opinion through the editorial process. So we're being spoon-fed a very, very select message.
Yeah, because like you can find places where people are talking about Sudan and Myanmar.
Oh yeah, but I'm talking mainstream. So
Yes,
Joe Klotz in Middle America actually understands that it exists.
It looks as if Myanmar's junta is going to be defeated. They've lost control of the majority of the country. Clap, clap, clap. I'm not entirely certain the other guys are any better. However,
they're better than the junta.
The junta certainly wasn't good. So that's I guess semi-encouraging. Look, there are sunshine and rainbows somewhere.
There.
And it's also designed to be kept front and center in a certain sense. There's a attitude of obscuring what's happening, what's talking on both sides that happens. Like, two things can be true at once. Hamas can be bad, and the Israeli government and defense establishment can also be bad. But a lot of people seem invested in lionizing one or the other. And that's,
I think that the whole situation is horrible.
And that's the problem. Like, let's suppose Hamas and their allies poof away and disappear tomorrow. Israel is still going to be killing Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. It's not going to stop. and addressing that. And like people are like, oh yeah, we got to get rid of Netanyahu. I'm like, I don't think you understand. This entire structure from root to stem is rotten to the core.
Yeah. And arguably, to some extent, has been since the founding of the country.
Well, it's deliberately designed that way. In the beginning, like I don't like to get into 1948 for the mere fact that it's happened and you can't undo it. And like arguing about this becomes a red herring.
I'm talking about the violent feud among the various Israeli factions themselves. And then you put all this other stuff on top of it, and it's honestly no surprise that you're going to have these kind of conflicts continuing.
Yes, there is a certain aspect to Israel that I think is underappreciated, is that Israel was not united in its founding. It was founded by a particular faction which seized control, very violently, to the fact of to the fact of outright killing members of the other factions. And Mossad is a great example of this. Mossad was a particularly violent organization integrated into this larger infrastructure. And there's a kind of an unwritten truth to this, that until that problem is solved, even if Israel magically solved their problem with the Palestinians, they'd fall in amongst each other. Like that old saying, oh yeah, we're going to come together if someone outside attacks us. Yes, you have to, because otherwise you have internal problems that are insurmountable. Like another underappreciated aspect of this is there are Orthodox Jews in Israel being beaten by the police because they refuse to participate in the IDF.
They're not well liked, actually, by much of Israeli society, and it's not because they refuse to participate in a war. It's because they don't do their duty like everybody else, in doing mandatory service.
It is, though. I think that's part of it, but that's also like a characteristic of the authoritarian nature of Israel. Yeah. They have they have to have increasingly shrinking pools of power. And just because you're on the inside one day, and this is true of most right-wing movements, just because you're on the inside one day does not guarantee you'll be on the inside the next.
Yeah.
Do you think Netanyahu is acutely aware of the internal opposition to his rule and trying to stave that off? I don't think he's trying to stave off the instability any more than he is capable of doing so. There is a certain blessing for Israel that Palestinians exist, because it gives them a very clear and present boogeyman. If you're trying to say something, Commander, you're cutting out there.
I said the Palestinians give the average Israelis something to rally around. It gives them a common sense of purpose, which otherwise I would contend would be lacking.
It is the exact same relationship in the antebellum South, and that the poor Southern whites who had no chance of ever obtaining significant property had around their understanding of the racial hierarchy. The exact same relationship. It's incredibly similar. It's that kind of having an other is incredibly effective in societies where there is inequality, which is most societies, to be fair. However, it's much more acute in societies that try to enforce those inequalities.
Yeah.
All right, I need to step away for a second and open the door before the dog eats me, so they can go try to steal the cat food.
My dogs are being quiet tonight. Yeah, I think the whole region, though, is kind of divided against itself. If you go to any of the other Arab countries, the Palestinians are, I won't go so far as to say despised, but they're viewed with utter contempt.
That is true.
Yeah, and for them it was the the Israelis are mistreating our Arab brothers and they've seized control of the holy places. That was a kind of a unifying thing, but since things have calmed down and the Israelis are allowing access to the temple and the rock there and all of that stuff, they don't have that unifying sense. They have individual grudges. They don't have, we're all Arabs and we hate Israel. In fact, some of them have developed relatively normalized, friendly relations with Israel.
Yeah. Pan-Islamism was probably a long shot to begin with, but Israel chilling out on a certain level in the 80s and 90s definitely put a stake through the heart of that. But it was incredibly, like, the existence of Israel was effectively how a lot of these countries and a lot of fairly terrible dictators organized themselves in a very real sense. Yep. Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein. I honestly don't think, like, we talk a lot about the effect of World War I and how it shaped the world we have today, but very specifically 2001 onward would be very different, I think, if there was a different relationship between Israel and their neighbors.
100%.
The war on terror probably doesn't happen, or at least doesn't happen in the same way. The United States has the capability of being a very popular player in the Middle East. But Israel has been an anchor around our neck for decades there.
To return back to the sort of hierarchy that Arab countries have, up until now, some of the worst atrocities that have been committed against the Palestinians. People talk about the Al-Nakba, the ethnic cleansing which occurred, but in terms of total death, that during that event, it's something like maybe close to 10,000 people. But you have Black September, where Jordan kicks out the Palestinians, which killed, I forget how many people died, but a lot. And then the Sabra and Shatila massacres, which were certainly aided and abetted by Israel, but they were actually committed by Christian Arab militia in Lebanon.
Well, the degree to which, hang on, because like aided and abetted by Israel is kind of a soft way of putting that. Israel gave them the weapons. They drove them to the place. They let them in. Potentially, and
they used flares too.
Yes, they had potentially had intelligence agents picking out targets for these guys. And they used flares to illuminate it at night so the killings could continue. Like, it wasn't so much an aiding and abetting. They were direct participants. Like, in a very real sense.
Yeah.
The intelligence agent thing is kind of disputed, and we're probably never going to get a real answer on that.
No, we'll never know that.
It's certainly something that was levied by press at the time. And like Israel played a very real role in that. They also directly participated. They opened up the massacre the day before by shelling those areas. And they never provided any evidence as to the claim of, oh, there are 2,000 Palestinian terrorists in here. It's like, oh, there were 900 terrorists in the Al-Shifa hospital. Okay. Why? Why were there 900 terrorists in this hospital? That doesn't seem like a thing that terrorists do, congregate in targets like that.
And Saddam has mountains of chemical weapons.
Yes.
When has a government ever lied to the world about something?
And like in Israel, it's a particularly egregious case. Like I see a bunch of commenters who usually do a fairly good job. Like again, Ryan Macbeth comes to mind. In one of these
Yeah.
videos where they're talking about, oh, these guys that Israel targeted, and they shot them two missiles, by the way. Yeah, they were terrorists, and there's no evidence to show they were terrorists in the video. But Ryan Macbeth goes, well, these guys were clearly terrorists because Israel shot at them twice, and Israel wouldn't shoot at people.
They
who
were in a free
terrorists.
fire zone.
Yeah, that's not a valid excuse. Sorry.
No, it's not a valid excuse.
Like, do you understand the circularness of this
To say
reasoning?
that
These people were terrorists because Israel targeted them. No, bad dog. These people were terrorists because Israel targeted them. Go bother the cats. And we know that they were terrorists because they were targeted by Israel. Like what? Like what? Did you have an editor check this? I remember the yellow cake uranium claims. I remember very specifically Colin Powell getting up and talking about the chemical weapons trailers, and they were like these like 1950s looking ass things that he gets up and talks about. Like what? Huh? Avery is punishing me for not paying attention to it.
used him.
Yeah,
That
Colin
was-
Powell should be very pissed about what happened to him. That's
So he's infuriated with the GOP and the Bushes.
yeah.
It's nothing to do with him anymore. That's why he hasn't gone into politics.
Mark Milley.
I thought Colin Powell passed away.
No, I think Schwarzkopf did.
No,
Yeah.
Colin Powell did pass away. 2021.
Oh,
Interesting.
you know what? It's been a long. Like I'm still existing basically in 2020. It feels like everything is still 2020, and we're 4 years on. Stormin Norman Schwarzkopf. 2012. Okay, I'm not crazy.
Norman Schwarzkopf is dead?
And has been for over a decade apparently.
Oh, wow. Yeah, Wow.
There's a great video of a Norman Schwarzkopf giving a speech at West Point, and the bravest cadet in the entire army gets up and asks him, "Sir, will you get a beer with me?" And like having been in that particular kind of environment before, and I'm sure you feel the same way, Commander McMillan, you understand just the brass balls that would take.
No, I can definitely. I mean, even without a military background, I can definitely give people of how ballsy the question like that would be. I didn't know that Creighton Abrams died in 1974.
I worked very hard to hide from flag officers. Can't see me. Like Tyrannosaurus Rex, they track movement.
Yeah, exactly. Remain quiet in your corner and don't look up.
The hardest one was a couple summers I spent a week doing some training stuff and some teaching stuff at Scott Air Force Base, which is the logistical hub for the entire United States military and has at any given time somewhere between 20 and 28 flag officers living on it.
What is a flag officer?
Anyone who is a general or an admiral of any rank, of any of the ranks.
Yeah, field grade and in junior officers. And field grade for everybody except the Navy is 04 to 06. And for the Navy, it's 05 and 06 only. 04s are not considered field grade for the Navy for some reason.
Did you, when you made 04, did you have to go to War College? Or was that at 05?
Technically, you don't have to go. It's offered to you. Sometimes they will say, yeah, you have to go, but usually it's offered. It's because there's a quota system set for each of the services that they have to have X number of graduates from joint professional military education, level 1 and level 2. Level 1 is War College, and then level 2 is the Staff and Command College in Yorktown. Most people like to go because it's basically a year vacation. A lot of people jokingly called it, yeah, I'm here at War College on the golf scholarship.
Well, yeah, and you also pick up an extra master's degree. Jesus.
Yeah, they do now. At one time, only the Naval War College offered a master's when you got your stuff. Other places had affiliations with local universities, and you could, do additional coursework there, and they would consider all your stuff being done at the service college as part of it, and then award you a master's.
Does a place
Probably less than 10% of the people would actually do that.
Does a place like West Point have basically almost all the subjects that you would have at a major prestigious university like a Big Ten university? But it's
but remember that the service academies are undergraduate level only.
Yes.
Okay.
I actually know a little bit about the West Point environment, at least the outside part of it. ROTC cadets and West Point cadets basically go through the same evaluation process and are in the same pool of officer candidates for where they get assigned and on the order of merit list. So in ROTC, you do 2 years of like basic stuff, learning how to do the things. And then in your third year, you start preparing for something called LDAC, Leadership Development and Assessment Course. And this used to be up in Washington at Joint Base Lewis McChord. Now it's at Fort Knox, which is hell on earth, but distilled in a tiny place with lots of gold. I had the most miserable weekend of my life at Fort Knox. That's a different story. However, this assessment is like multi-weeks long, and you're put through all these skills, this culmination skills, and you're evaluated on each one. And this basically is the biggest chunk of what determines whether you go active duty or guard or reserve, and whether you get your branch specialization you want. And West Point cadets and ROTC cadets from all over the country are funneled into this thing all over the summer of their third year in college. It is the heart and soul of what ROTC programs do, preparing you for LDAC.
Yeah, that's different than the Navy, but
there was a particular and then when I was a cadet, it was right around 2008, 2009, 2010, before my illness prevented me from going further. The class ahead of me went to LDAC with the son of David Petraeus, who was just as much of a shit as you might imagine he was.
Yeah.
And that was like it was a different time, because it was just around the time that David Petraeus was a CENTCOM commander and very popular in the Army circles for writing the COIN manual, that first one that has since turned out to be a difficult book to follow.
Yeah.
But I remember that manual particularly, because everyone's like, we got to read this. This is the thing that's going to turn around Iraq. Whoopsie. Although, I don't think sending a couple copies to Israel would go astray.
That's good.
I mean, some of David Petraeus' COIN manual.
Yes. Like here, I'm just going to leave this out in the break room in the Israeli headquarters or something.
It would be amusing.
Read me.
Yeah, I think they're pursuing more of a Soviet-style counterinsurgency operation.
Just really badly.
Yeah, they'd actually be doing a better job. I think actually the Soviets did a better job of actually planting in their own people and turning the population against the insurgents. At least in Ukraine, they did that. brought in people from Eastern Ukraine to basically
the other thing I think
re-educate the populace.
Is worth talking about is John fucking Spencer.
Who's that?
John Spencer is. Let me see if I can find his stupid Twitter profile to read it off properly. I think he made up his own think tank. That feels like what's happened here. He's become incredibly unpopular in military science circles. Chief of Urban Warfare Studies at the War Institute. He needs to be fired. He has been talking about for months now how Israel is the most moral army in the world. Gag. And he is the sole source that people are using when they try to reference this. And he is lying about what happened in the Battle of Mosul, trying to claim that America killed more civilians in ratio-wise than Israel has in Gaza. The other thing he's quite famous for is he made a little handbook for our Ukrainians at the beginning of the war about urban warfare that advised them to, among other things, shoot at tanks with paintball guns to try to blind their optics.
We've watched Heroes one too many times.
I cannot stress to you enough, chat, that if you ever find yourself in a situation in which you are fighting a tank, that a paintball gun is not your most efficacious weapon. So the Battle of Mosul was obviously not great. It was widely criticized by human rights groups. And what largely happened was ISIS, very early on in the evolution of ISIS, they took the city of Mosul in Iraq. And it was kind of embarrassing because like the Iraqi police and army had them outnumbered something like 14-1, and they ran away. And so this city became kind of the symbol of ISIS's effort to set up a caliphate. And about that time, Obama realized, oh shit, we probably should do something about this, and committed American air power to stopping ISIS. So the Battle of Mosul was a joint operation between a number of countries, America's Air Force and the Navy air arm, and the Iraqi army to retake Mosul. And it was incredibly bloody. Something on the order of 5,000 or so civilians were killed. Estimates vary.
Yeah.
The highest estimate I've seen is 9,000. That's total. Both sides, ISIS and the coalition. So even if we grant the 9,000, that's still this is it was close to 6 months, wasn't it? This whole battle.
The Battle of Mosul, yeah.
Yeah, it was a long ass fight. It took them 6 months to liberate the city. So there is no world that any sane person can say that the Israeli army has done a better job. Yep, October 2016 to July, so about 6 months, a little longer. That the Iraqi army or the Israeli army has done a better job than the American forces in Mosul. There's just no sane world in which that's possible. It's just mathematically farcical. Yeah, you can throw a Molotov cocktail in a tank. You're just gonna piss it off, though. You're like, oh, it got a little hot in here. I'm gonna shoot you now. Like in World War II, that was a valid tactic. Particular designs of tanks, especially certain things like Wesps that the Germans used that had open tops. Very useful. Not so much against a buttoned-up tank. Yeah, John, he must be one of those people who's hanging out, left over from the reformers. He's got to be he's got to have some connection to them, that no one can fire.
Who's that?
John Spencer. I can't fathom why he has that job. And to be fair, there have been some interesting things people have said about West Point education recently, that they have to adapt to certain things, and that's probably true. But this guy is just here making an ass of the entire profession of military science. Holy shit. And worse, a whole bunch of historians are trying to correct him, and he just keeps blocking them. Like, he's very clearly aware of what he's doing wrong. Very acutely aware that he's the bad guy.
Yeah, the easiest way to deal with criticism is just make them go away. Don't argue with them. They might prove you wrong.
Yes, by doing things like citing facts. God damn those facts. Yeah, if you're a civilian, your best bet when facing an army is escape. Well, here's the other thing that I think. There's a whole bunch of people who are very loudly talking about how Israel's the most moral army in the world, and I would like to invite these people to go stay in Eastern Rafah for a week. If Israel's the most moral army in the world, then surely it's very safe.
There's no such thing as a moral army, but Israel is certainly that.
Not one.
Yeah.
Well, civilian buildings can be used in combat. Like that's the whole thing about why I have a hard time with the human shields argument, because they're like, yeah, they're using human shields and there's a bunch of Hamas fighters in an abandoned building. Like, no, that's perfectly valid thing to do. You can fortify a building. We've been doing it for hundreds of years. Yes, the IDF has, and Commander McMillan might be able to shed some light on this, because I have a spotty understanding of this in American military jurisdiction. Free fire zones are considered bad ideas, but I don't know if they're technically against the laws of war. I know military ethics.
They are not, but you have to have a reasonable justification for doing so. In other words, if you've made an effort to evacuate the civilians from a zone and you know there's been a lot of enemy activity in said zone, you could just say, yeah, we're going to shoot anything that moves there.
Yes.
That's quasi-justifiable. But if it's just, hey, I don't like these people, and if I see movement, I'm going to automatically assume they're enemies. Nah, that don't fly, dude.
Free fire zones are like, so what I was taught as far as this goes is free fire zones are often unethical and very rarely effective, and that they are an order that should be only issued in very specific circumstances. Not in populated cities is definitely not one of, is definitely a no-no.
Yeah, but my opinion is a free fire zone is a crutch used by an ineffective commander, because
Yes.
he has to find something to blame for why things aren't working. So it's, well, the ROE are preventing me from accomplishing my mission, ROE being rules of engagement. So I'm going to declare a free fire zone so we can shoot anything, and then things will go great.
Yeah, like I think there's a great example in popular media is Generation Kill talks about this rather extensively, like the conflict that the Marines felt over the ROE and what they felt should have been the ROE, which they seem to feel should be more restrictive. And there's a very particular point where the commander orders a free fire zone, and civilians get hit because of it, and like the Marines damn near mutiny at that point in that particular story. And like the details of this are verified by both Nathaniel Fick in his book One Bullet Away, who took part in the mutiny, and Evan Wright, the journalist who wrote the book upon which this miniseries was based.
Yeah.
Like Generation Kill is a fairly remarkable story if you haven't seen it. Definitely worth sitting and watching. Hard at some points, but it like, I think if you watch it, Jumped in particular, if you haven't, because you and I clash over this from time to time, you can understand why I feel the way I feel about America's attitude about civilians on the battlefield. Like my personal experience notwithstanding, there's a very much an effort is made by America, and like that's all you can ask at the end of the day. Sometimes very sincere effort by most American troops is made to observe the best practices in this regard.
Yeah.
And it has been near universal, and like the effort I saw, like my cadre going through an ROTC to weed out cadets who wouldn't do that, who they thought were too bloodthirsty, inappropriately so, um, was remarkable, really. Uh,
Yeah.
like a lot of work goes into that, or even the fact that they threw on civilians in the battlefield into the training rotation, like when they did, like it was like there was 90% of the cadets I was with were never going to see combat, but they taught it anyway because they wanted to pound that ethos into you.
Oh yeah.
And it's why
Yeah.
if it's why, like the other night when I was on Sunday, somebody accused me of both sides as and I was a little hurt because screw you, I've been a leftist longer than most of you have been alive, but um, uh, I can see why, because sometimes I'm carrying water for the guys who are trying the hardest and not getting recognized for it. And like the other thing I always like to point out is when these egregious things get done, people get put on trial. And you don't see that in Israel. You just don't. And that's why I have such a problem with Israel, and why I have a problem with America's support of Israel.
Yeah. I concur.
Well, we have been going for a little bit. Would you both like to go ahead with closing thoughts, starting with the commander?
Sure. In terms of the whole Rafa thing, I mean, I've said this in virtually every time I've been with you guys and with any of the other shows where we get into discussing military matters. And it goes back to the old Clausewitzian maxim of, warfare is politics carried out through violent means. And I think that's where people should really be focusing their interest on these things. So how is the fighting in Rafah going? It's why did it happen this way, and what is preventing it from being stopped? And it's politics, and typically, in my opinion, it's domestic politics that drives that train. It's not international politics. So that's where I would be focusing my attention right now. Like
Let's
on the
certainly
outside.
where we're going to get more information.
Yeah.
Hetman?
Yep.
Any closing thoughts?
Well, not really today. I'm sorry I haven't had as much to say. It's been a longer day than usual. I started my first job in a while, so.
Fair enough. I is that going well still?
Yeah, actually. It went well. It's just kind of tiring.
Oh, trust me, I know. I have to sit down and get caught up on a whole bunch of things here for the channel that I haven't been doing. I've been derelict. It's probably because I've been playing too much Space Engineers. So I just want to talk about a thing. I want to throw it up on the screen and move our things out of the way. I'm going to move all of our things. This is the Wikipedia article on the Principles of War, National Principles. Here is the United States Principles of War that you get taught in basic military history. It goes by the acronym MASMOOS, but we're going to talk about objective. Objective
But they
is...
changed it. It used to be Moose Month.
Yes, they did. But everything gets changed. Like, do you know the paragraph operation order was changed twice in the last 20 years?
Well, you have to change it in order to justify your existence. You can't just say, "Oh yeah, we're going to hold to the thing that my predecessor put into play." I have to change it to show that I'm different and better than he is.
Objective: direct every military operation toward a clearly defined, decisive, and attainable objective. The ultimate military purpose of war is the destruction of the enemy's ability and will to fight. Rafah is none of these things. I don't know what they're doing. They're dicking around in eastern Rafah, and they can't destroy Hamas. This is not a militarily attainable objective. And it's being done, like Commander said, war is politics extended out by different means. It's being done in order to satisfy domestic politics of Israel. And that is just not us. That's wrong on so many levels. It harms Israel. It harms us as their ally. It harms the communities that Israel claims to speak for, and it harms the Palestinians who are getting killed. And it makes Hamas more powerful, which guarantees that all the people who said that Hamas is going to be destroyed are just going to be talking about the same thing in 10 years when Hamas does this shit again. This entire thing has been a tragedy up and down, and nothing has been achieved except for the death of 30,000 Palestinians, 1,200 Israelis, and hundreds of thousands of casualties on both sides. This is just a phenomenal tragedy.
Is that the actual tally now by the Gaza Health Ministry?
The Gaza Health Ministry has given us a 30,000, and that's been fairly consistent. But wounded and missing put the number over 100,000. So that is casualty count, not death count. I'll check, actually, just to make sure. Gaza war casualties. Because that was like 2 days ago. And I last checked the number. 34,262 have been killed. 70% of them are women and minors. I'm sure they were all Hamas. The IDF doesn't know how many civilians have been killed, but they somehow know how many terrorists have been killed, even though that makes no fucking sense. 78,204 people are injured or missing. No, there's more. Sorry, Al Jazeera has a better number. 8,000 people are missing, 78,204 are injured, and 34,789 have been killed. So, yes, we are above 100,000 when you take the entirety of the casualties into account. 498 people in the West Bank and 4,950 have been injured. We probably haven't been doing a very good job covering the West Bank collectively as
no, not at all.
An entire thing. The Israeli attacks have been revised down from 1,405 to 1,139, which is still horrible. 8,730 are injured, so they are at nearly 10,000 casualties. Half of Gaza homes have been destroyed, 80% of commercial facilities, 73% of schools, 12 out of 35 hospitals, 83% of wells are not operational, and 267 places of worship, mosques and churches included. So yes, this is a phenomenal disaster. And with that, on that happy thought, I will leave you with those sunshine and rainbows. Thank you, everyone, for watching tonight. Have an excellent night.
Take care, everyone.
Good night.